please join me in welcoming and rise and welcome Professor Mervyn King. He needs no introduction, and he's going to deliver the opening keynote address to this very important summit. And the topic for his keynote address is a global reporting system from competition to cooperation. So please keep your seatbelts fastened, as this will be a fascinating part of our journey, and you shouldn't miss a single second or a single word. So crew, please take your seats, counting down 3, 2, 1. Mervyn, the cockpit is yours.
Thank you very much, Rogers. My apologies for my camera. I don't know what's wrong, but you have an image of me on screen, and I hope you can all clearly hear me. A global reporting system from competition to cooperation. In order to speak about that, it's a story of the 2 decades of the 21st century and the last year of the last decade. By the end of the 20th century, we, directors, preparers, users, in the question of reporting, knew that we had reached ecological overshoot, the technical term for the fact that in the main companies had used and were using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. But research also showed that the makeup of the market capitalization of companies showed something very different from the 20th century moving towards the end of the 20th century. And that is only about 20% of the market cap was reflected as additives in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards. At the time, I was chairman of the United Nations so-called Eminent Persons Group. It was a governance and oversight group of the various agencies at the United Nations. And the International Federation of Accountants called for a meeting at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, where I was stationed. And at that meeting was also the World Bank and various other international bodies and some iconic companies. It was held under Chatham House rules, but now a matter of public knowledge. At that meeting, the concern was that we, and I include myself, mea culpa, as the chairman and director of companies listed in London, Europe, and South Africa, were issuing annual reports which included only the AFS according to IFRS standards in our part of the world, and that was only reporting, so research showed, on 20% of the market cap. So IFAC's concern was that in doing so, directors were not being fully accountable. In 1997 in Boston, Bob Massey and Alan White grasped the nettle and started drafting guidelines on how to report on this 80%, which was not being reported on. That became known as the Global Reporting Initiative, which moved to Amsterdam. And I then moved to, I became chairman of GRI and had an office in Amsterdam. And we were looking at matters through a civil society lens, at all the matters impacting people and planet. We were under the impression at that time that prosperity was being cared for because, as you all know, during the 20th century, the paradigm was the primacy of the shareholder, and directors believed their job was to increase the wealth of shareholders, and that wealth would trickle down to the impoverished at the bottom. Well, it never happened, and we have the inequality problem which we face today. At ongoing meetings with IFAC and other international bodies such as the IIA, we accepted that sustainability reporting was becoming more important than the financial report. But having said that, I said what companies are now doing, so we're moving to about the middle towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century, what companies are now doing are reporting in two silos, a financial report and a sustainability report, determining what were the sustainability issues pertinent to the business of that board's company. And I said that's divorced from reality, that reporting, because the question of human capital, health and safety, as we know today with the pandemic, a critical aspect of the S in the ESG, cannot be divorced from financial capital, nor can natural capital, nor can intellectual capital. So a debate started, and at that time, His Royal Highness Prince Charles started accounting for sustainability. And what Sir Michael Peet of Peet Marwick fame, who was then the chairman of A4S, argued that these things needed to be connected. I said they need to be integrated because connected means you still looked at them in silos, when in fact, from an operations point of view, these things were all integrated 24/7, including this relationship between the company and its stakeholders. I used the musical term that there was a symphony on a daily basis between the resources used by a company and the relationship with its stakeholders. The consequence of all that was a meeting was held at St. James's Palace, graciously hosted by His Royal Highness. Sir Michael Peet opened the meeting, and I addressed the meeting where the executive of FASB, of the IFRS, of GRI, and everybody mentioned in the alphabet soup was invited, and we wondered whether the executives of FASB would turn up, but they did. And at that meeting, I addressed the meeting on integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. And it was unanimously agreed that another body should yet be formed. And as you know, the International Integrated Reporting Council was formed. And after that, we then started arguing that these things should be thought of on an integrated basis, the resources and the relationships, and an integrated report should be issued. And we developed a framework which was issued in December 2013 to integrate the financial with the so-called non-financial assets, or the tangible with the intangible assets. The GRI was the only body in the ESG space at that time. But as it was gaining in importance, other framework providers entered that space. And that was the start of the clutter and confusion which preparers find today with the number of framework providers. And comparability between companies started being diluted because one company was using one framework, another company was using another framework. At the same time, so going back now, starting in the second decade of the 21st century, Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board was founded in America, in San Francisco. They had a focus on financial capital. And if you look at the IR framework, you will see that our audience is the providers of financial capital, but financial capital is defined in the framework as the subscribers, the equity holders, the lenders of money, and the providers of credit, service providers and the suppliers. But because of this overlapping and confusion for preparers and the dilution of comparability, at the IRC we started the corporate reporting dialogue. The purpose of that was to get these framework providers in one room and try and discuss with them the possibility of convergence to try and develop one standard of sustainability reporting. They wanted me as chairman of the IRC to chair it. I said, no, we need an independent person to chair it. The first chair was Eugette Labelle from Transparency International, and then Ian McIntosh from IFRS. Well, some progress was being made, but in fact, there was little progress being made. One would argue that their definition of emission was better than the other, and so it went on and on. In 2019, at about the same time as our international conference, the IRC's international conference, which finished only a few days ago, the 2019 one, I was the speaker closing the conference as I did this year. And the essence of my speech was to say that these framework providers in the ESG space are dealing with public interest issues. And it was a social outrage that they saw themselves as competitors, especially now that the Sustainable Development Goals had been issued in 2015. And SDG 17, to me, was the most important goal, because without cooperation and collaboration, we wouldn't achieve the outcomes of the other 16 goals: clean water, clean production. They're all outcomes based. And I said, not only is it an outrage that you are not collaborating to try and simplify the sustainability reporting, but you're all fishing from the same pond financially. And society should become aware of this. Well, I'm told by several people that this, together with the CRD, started galvanizing discussions amongst these framework providers. We now move into the last year of the second decade of the 20th century, and COVID struck our shores, the virus. We saw the power of SDG 17, collaboration, cooperation of countries in trying to develop a vaccine to try and stop the scourge. And as you all know, the first vaccine in the UK was administered yesterday. So in an extraordinarily short time of about 10 months, a vaccine has been developed, and it was through cooperation and collaboration. So during the last year, the following has happened. IFAC has called for a parallel body, an International Sustainability Standard Board, parallel to the IASB, under the same oversight as the three-tier structure of the IFRS Foundation, to have one standard of sustainability reporting, but to connect them through an integrated report with the financial. The World Economic Forum in January of this year, together with the Big Four, issued their metrics for a hybrid form of reporting. And about 70% of those metrics were in fact GRI standards. The European Commission's task force said they were commencing a project to redesign the reporting on non-financial standards. Then what happened was what I termed the Gang of Five: the GRI, SASB, IRC, CDSB, and CDP issued a statement saying they were going to cooperate and work together to try and establish a unified system of reporting. There were three rectangular figures. In the first rectangle was the IASB consistent, mature financial reporting standards. In the second rectangle was the SASB, CDSB, and CDP, for them to collaborate to try and form a single standard of sustainability reporting. In the third rectangle or box was the GRI, which it was said was to operate as a filter because many of the GRI standards were still being looked at through the civil society lens, whereas SASB was looking at standards which had been standardized for 77 industries and were being looked at through an enterprise value creation lens, in other words, a business lens. But many of the GRI standards would become financially material in the prosperity of the three Ps and would join the standards. IOSCO also issued a statement saying they would collaborate with the Gang of Five and that sustainable finance could not be achieved or maintained without consideration of ESG. In 2016, BlackRock had issued a statement saying within the next 5 years, ESG would have to be considered by asset managers, trustees of pension funds, and directors of financial institutions before making an investment decision on behalf of their beneficiaries. Larry Fink was out by 1 year because it's now being done for the last 18 months. In the capital markets of the world, when considering a bond with a particular coupon, the great financial institutions in the world are doing not only a financial due diligence, but are also doing an ESG due diligence. How has this investee company dealt with their environmental issues? How has it made its product? How in making its product were the impacts on the environment and society? If there were adverse impacts, what is their strategy to eradicate or ameliorate those impacts? What is the quality of governance? Is it still a mindless checklist approach to governance? They have a nominations committee, for example, tick. Or is it a mindful outcomes-based governance, fitting in with the narrative of outcomes-based reporting with inputs to outcomes in the IRC framework and the outcomes-based sustainable development goals? The IFRS then issued a consultation paper in which they asked the question, is there a demand for the IFRS to form under its governance structure a sustainability standards board? Now, that governance structure, as you know, has public authority because you have the top IFRS Foundation, which I believe is a Delaware company, and underneath it is the IFRS Monitoring Board, where public authorities are the members. Underneath that are the Board of Trustees, which have oversight over the IASB standards of financial reporting. They operate, and they have operated and spoken and have relationships with regulators in 144 countries, and those financial reporting standards are adopted in 144 countries. So in 144 countries, they are consistent, they're filled with rigor, and they're being consistently audited according to standards set by the IAASB because of constant communication between the IASB and the IAASB. So the structure is there, the consistency of reporting is there, the maturity of that financial reporting is there, and the relationship with regulators and governments in 144 countries is there. When collaboration happens, certainly in the corporate world, it leads to thinking of mergers. And the collaboration of the Gang of Five has led to the announcement of the intended merger of SASB and the IRC. Why? Well, if you look at the IR framework and look at SASB's website, you will see their audience is the same. It's the providers of financial capital. You will see that the outcome is the same in the sense of enterprise value creation, but taking account of what is pertinent from the point of view of impact on people and planet to that company in that industry. And the IFRS Foundation do not have to reinvent the wheel in establishing a sustainability standards board, because the Gang of Five have said they would collaborate with the IFRS Foundation. Not only that, this struggle to get these framework providers to collaborate, and now they are. Now there are several bodies, as I've mentioned, IOSCO, WEF, IFAC, EC, all dabbling into the river of an SSB, because all these are tributaries flowing into this river of a single standard of sustainability reporting. The greatest irony, of course, would be if these dabblers were not collaborators. But the clear statement coming through of inclination of collaboration is there. And I believe there will be collaboration. So to fit these standards together in a single sustainability standards board, the IFRS does not have to reinvent the wheel. We have the standards of the Gang of Five. So available to the IFRS is the question of fitting those standards together, or the second box, as I said, and hopefully the GRI will move from the third box into the second box. The question of fitting those standards together requires compromise. And I think that's one of the difficulties at the moment, is the compromise of SASB standards and the GRI standards. The difficulty is they have different horizons and are looking at it through different lenses, civil society lens and an enterprise value creation lens. But compromise can bring these standards together. I know these standards. I've worked with them, and I believe there can be compromise and there can be compatibility. The question of the establishment of a single standard of sustainability reporting, I now move into the era of speculation. The IFRS Foundation, in my judgment, is the best, if not the only body. The what has been agreed internationally, that we need simplification to avoid this confusion and clutter which has happened in the ESG space. We need a single standard of sustainability reporting. We need to connect them, that information, with the financial report. Who is the most informed body of persons to connect them. In my judgment, it's the board of each company. The board is formed, let's say, 6 or 8 times a year, exactly what is happening in the company. And the purpose of this information is to make accountability more informed. Going back to the first decade, accountability was only being informed as to 20% of necessary information. With the development of the GRI, then SASB, CDSB, TCFD, etc., there was more information and accountability was more informed. That permitted users to make more informed assessments as to whether or no to invest in company X, the equity of company X, or the equity of company B, to lend money to company X or to lend the money to company B. So, and comparability would, of course, be improved enormously. So my speculation is that the IFRS Foundation, the responses will overwhelmingly be in favor of their being the oversight body for the establishment of a single standard of sustainability reporting. When should this be done? The answer is now. The urgency is clear. Humankind is running out of time to meet the SDGs in the timeline of 2030. We need to meet those SDGs in order to have a habitable planet for those who come after us towards the end of the century. So the what and the when have been decided. It's only the who. And I think the who is the IFRS Foundation. And under that governance structure, I believe we can have one single standard of sustainability reporting. And of course, the merger of SASB and the IRC will also help add to the simplification and the advancement towards a comprehensive reporting system of reporting. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll be delighted to receive questions. Thank you.
So can we, okay, we have time, and Professor King would love to answer some of your questions. So you can send your questions in your Q&A box. And until then, Elaine and I will start with some of the questions. So Elaine, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mervyn, for those great insights, and for a very strong recommendation in favour of the IFRS moving things forward. But you started out by talking about the civil society lens that informed the sort of development of GRI and the GRI standards. And in describing how the collaboration approach would work, you talked about GRI moving into the second of these 3 rectangles. So moving into the, or closer to the sort of SASB and the integrated reporting type of approach. So my question is, doesn't this mean that the focus on civil society, this civil society lens, which was, after all, you know, where sustainability reporting started, and which is the interest of all stakeholders, as well as the financial community. If GRI moves into this second rectangle, won't all of this civil society focus just get lost, and sustainability reporting will actually just be financial reporting on some issues which were previously intangible or non-financial?
The answer, Elaine, is in the negative, and I'll explain to you why. In 1997, when the GRI was founded, no financial company, be it a pension fund or a financial institution or an asset owner or an asset manager, did any ESG consideration. Today, before investing their beneficiaries' money, To discharge their duty of care to their beneficiaries, they do an ESG inquiry on the investee company, how they have handled the ESG issues. In fact, in some countries, including my own South Africa, it's mandated that trustees of pension funds have to do an ESG audit of the investee company before investing in the beneficiaries of those companies. The GRI standards, many of their standards will today maybe not have, some of those may not have financial materiality, but they will become and have financial materiality. So the world has changed completely. The ESG audit is being done by the providers of financial capital before investing their beneficiaries' money. And that's a huge change, which we never had before. So that's why I said the answer to you is in the negative. None of this civil society issues will be lost, because the question of the shareholder activist has been replaced by the value creation activist at AGMs. At AGMs, you get WWF, for example, appearing and asking, I see you've made $100 million EBITDA this year, but I'm very concerned how you made that $100 million. These were the adverse impacts on the environment. How, Mr. Chairman, are you going to deal with these adverse impacts? I'm really concerned whether this company is actually adding value to society or not. This is what is happening now at AGM. So none of these issues raised by GRI will be lost. The question is, over time, how much of it will be added in to the prosperity part of prosperity, people and planet. And it's still not lost, because the GRI standards will still be there, and it will be used as I'm using the words in the Gang of Fives, as a filter. So absolutely not. In the decisions in companies today, as you know, built into the business model are the SDGs pertinent to the business of the company. And the board will look at how the company is making its product, what are the activities from inputs to outcomes. And if there is a negative impact on the environment, for example, they will actually strategically endeavor in the year ahead to eradicate or ameliorate those negative impacts, so they actually can show that they are adding value to society. So the whole situation has changed quite dramatically. And companies will not be able to raise capital unless they are very aware of their ESG issues pertinent to the business of that company and deal with it in their business model and their purpose and their strategy going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, I have a simple question. So there is a lot of emphasis on what investors want and enterprise value creation lens. There are a large number of companies, they don't participate in capital markets. They are private companies. Many of them are very, very big, very large. We have several such companies here in Asia, and I guess they are around the world. Which lens they should use when deciding how to report on sustainability?
Well, I'll answer you by saying that there's now a chain of command. The ultimate consumer, let's say, is a company listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange, but there should be an agenda item at each board meeting of a company listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange, and that is supply chain. Every company, major company, should monitor what's happening in its supply chain. So that's where you find your SMEs, unlisted, for example, because we have learned that if you have, for example, a major supplier that's using child labor, breaching human rights convention, and that's discovered, you're going to lose 40% of your market cap the next morning on the Singapore Stock Exchange. So It is expected by the providers of financial capital. And one of the things they ask for before, let's say, a company listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange issues a bond with a particular coupon for bidding of financial institutions in the capital market, one of the things they ask for is, have you got a supply chain code of conduct? How are you monitoring it? What is happening in your supply chain? Because the buyer of that bond is putting their company's money into that bond. And if in that supply chain they're using child labor, the example I've given, it will impact on the value of that company, which becomes their debtor. So supply chain is a critical agenda item, as is stakeholder relationships and inputs to outcomes. These are agenda items which have never been on companies until recently. But every company should discuss their inputs to outcomes, particularly with climate change. I mean, how is climate change? Huge question. The outcomes of a company could change dramatically because of climate change. Stakeholder relationships. Some companies have started a new corporate animal completely, the corporate stakeholder relationship officer. His or her job is, the sole job is to continue talking to the stakeholders and do a written report to the board at each board meeting to see whether the board is meeting the needs, interests, and expectations of stakeholders. And the stakeholder knows the expectation by the company of that stakeholder, such as a service provider. And this relationship between stakeholder and companies is an informed one. If the boards are not informed by this, their oversight over management's proposals is blind. They have to be informed. So you need that agenda item, stakeholder relationships. You need the agenda item of supply chain. You need the agenda item of inputs to outcomes, and you need an agenda item of IT governance and cybersecurity. Why do you need these new agenda items? It's an answer to your question that the two critical risks to companies in the future is cybersecurity and climate change. So you need to discuss that at each board meeting. You cannot escape it. And discussion of supply chain starts meeting your issues because the company at the top has to report to their providers of capital, and the question of raising more capital by way of a rights issue, for example, how they are monitoring what is happening in their supply chain. Consequently, many SMEs today are starting to do integrated reports, as an example. So it's no longer companies are being blindsided. If a board is not got informed oversight, it's not doing its job, that board.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor. Now, coming to what you said, that listening to you, it looks like that the one big barrier that we have is, or what we need is perhaps the only thing standing between where we are now and a single reporting standard or system, whatever you call, is a compromise between SASB and GRI. In your view, what that compromise would look like, and which is perhaps acceptable to both of them?
Well, it's fitting the square peg into a round hole. So that's why I said it needs compromise. To me, the gold standard of sustainability reporting is the GRI. Maybe because I was chairman emeritus of GRI. It is the pioneer, but it started with a focus on people and planet. And as you know, it's got a stakeholder council where it has organizations such as ILO, the labor organization. And its standards are influenced by that, although they do have some economic standards. But for the GRI standards to fit in, or the SASB standards to fit in with the GRI standards, they come through different lenses and with different horizons. So there has to be compromise. And the alternative is that it's not fully compromised. And the IFRS uses, let's assume, the SASB and CDSB, because CDSB, as I'm talking to you, is talking to SASB to incorporate their standards into the SASB standards. So let's assume it's enlarged. SASB standards becomes the foundation for a single sustainability reporting. The GRI standards will still be there, and questions will still be asked. And some of those standards that are not fitting into the box of value creation will fit into that box of value creation. I have little doubt. So one way or another, a single standard will be created. If the GRI is to remain in the third box as a filter, so be it. I am hoping that there'll be compromise and there will be one standard. But companies may feel driven to report on certain standards which are not necessary for the Sustainability Standards Board standards. They will turn to GRI and report on that. But the confusion of overlapping and clutter will be gone. So I'm hoping for compromise. I mean, the other suggestion is, shouldn't there be a hybrid form of standards? In other words, take the SASB and GRI standards and weave them into the financial reporting standards of the IASB. I believe that would add to complexity, because it's bad enough that users are finding financial reporting as it is now incomprehensible to the average user, and hence the management commentary to get a narrative to try and explain it. So to weave into that sustainability issues, I think will just make it more complex. They are endeavoring to do that with climate change. Well, the TCFD, speaking for myself, I hope that succeeds, that we can get the TCFD standards built into the IASB standards, because it is so critical. But or to build the other myriad of sustainability standards into financial reporting standards to have a hybrid form of standards, I think is going to add to complexity and not enable the trustees of your pension fund to make an informed assessment about a company. They will become almost absolutely incomprehensible. So that's the alternative, which I think is a non-starter. So I think we need this parallel. I support IFAC completely, that we need this parallel between the IASB and SSSB, with integrated thinking and reporting in the middle, connecting the two, and in clear, concise, and understandable language so people can understand. The board has to spend more time, Rajesh, in understanding the financial and the non-financial, and explain it in clear, concise, and understandable language so the user can really make an informed assessment. And in this regard, I always quote that statement attributed to Winston Churchill in the last 2 weeks of the Second World War. He wrote a 3-page letter to his wife, and in the last sentence he said, "If I'd had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter." And that's what we as directors have to do, is spend more time understanding those financials, understanding, hopefully, the sustainability reporting standards, one standard, and anything else pertinent to the company maybe comes through the filter of the GRI, anything, and report it. But spend more time understanding it and explain it, not in IFRS speak or SSB speak or GRI speak, but in clear, concise, and understandable language, so that the users are really informed and have some outlook, because financial reporting obviously is historic, and give some outlook about the challenges and uncertainties facing the company in the future, so that a very informed assessment can be made by users.
Thank you, Professor. Elaine, you have any question?
Sure. Just a quick question from me, and then a question from one of our passengers today on our flight. Mervyn, you said that the what's been decided. You've recommended who should take the lead, and you said it's urgent. So, what does urgent mean? I mean, when can this actually happen? When do you expect to see a single sustainability reporting standard? In our lifetime?
Elaine, I think it'll be 18 months to 2 years. I think that's the time span I see, because of, you will appreciate their complexities involved, their compromises to be made, name changes. The IFRS will have to change its name to, for example, International Reporting Standards Board, because it's now got two arms. It's got a financial and a sustainability, so it can't be known as International Financial Reporting Standards Board. So there are all these issues, and there are egos involved, and compromises have to be made. So it's going to take a lot of earnest discussion, but the end goal is there. And I quoted in the speech I made the other evening, Helen Keller, that famous blind woman, there's something worse than being blind, that is having sight and no vision. Well, we see what the end vision is, and we've got to get there. And we all have to play our part. And but we cannot, I think there's absolute agreement, we cannot carry on with this myriad of framework providers and the confusion and clutter and the dilution of comparability, which is happening, has happened. So there has to be a solution. And of course, the perfect thing would be, and the SEC happens to be one of the public authorities in the IFRS monitoring board, the perfect thing would be for US GAAP and IFRS financial standards to actually converge. And then you have one global standard of financial reporting and one global standard of sustainability reporting. Then, Elaine, you and I, as directors of let's say, a financial institution, can really compare one company to another before investing our beneficiaries' money in those companies.
Well, that sounds super optimistic. I mean, 2 years to do all of that and to achieve this vision. Well, I always was an optimist. Let's hope it works out. But we have a question from Mukti Wag. I'm not sure about the pronunciation of the name, but Mukti says, what would be the ideal wealth generation model that would lead to sustainable living? He says, none of the current models seem to be in line with what the planet needs. Can we recommend something and create something new, not simply a combination and a simplification of current models or standards? Can we create something that would lead to sustainable living? What's your thought on that, Mervyn?
Yes, well, I think the question of the primacy of the shareholder and profit, and the criteria for success being increased profit, increased dividend, increased share prices, yesterday's thinking. The measurement of today is the outcome, I'm going to call it the results of a company in a fiscal period. Has it resulted in adding value to society? That's going to be the test. If it hasn't added value to society, well, the company shouldn't exist, because what it means is that as companies through the 20th century, we had a century, unfortunately, of unsustainable development, because it ended up with using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. And we're still in that unfortunate position today. That's why this has become critical and urgent to fix it up. So the measurement is going to be, has it actually added value to society? If it hasn't added value to society, I can promise you that it won't get support from credit providers, from providers of capital, and from society in general. Remember, people keep on saying that society is the licensor of companies. Well, that is a dilution of the reality, because going back to the 19th century, wealthy families refused to continue giving money as working capital to unlimited liability organizations, because on bankruptcy, they were liable to the creditors and the employees. And the government, the representative of the people in the UK and in the state of Massachusetts, dreamed up this creating of an artificial incapacitated person, the company. And the company is, when something goes wrong, the wrath of society turns against the company. It should turn against the directors, who are the conscience of the company. The company's got no conscience. It's absolutely incapacitated. And so society, it's an instrument of society. I always contend that the limited liability companies are the most important citizen in Singapore. Why? It raises capital, it creates jobs, it keeps the economy going, it keeps society going. And it was created by society for society. It's not only, that's what had happened. And it was created by society for the purpose of adding value. And we moved from that to the primacy of the shareholder, increasing the wealth of the shareholder, on the premise of trickle down to the impoverished at the bottom. Well, the trickle became treacle and it stuck at the top. It never came down. And the inequality gap just got worse. And we have to overcome that. That's one of the things we have to try and achieve. And that's why people and planet is so important and GRI is so important. So all these things taken together, as you said, Elaine, complex, but we have to achieve it. I asked the other night, can we do it? Yes, we can. No, we must. We have to do it. And I think we owe a moral duty to those who come after us to do it.
Okay, thank you, Mervyn. I think we have used our time, but still, I feel compelled to ask one question, because lots of our participants on this summit, they are sustainability practitioners on the ground, and they are at the receiving end of whether it's competition between the frameworks and standards and proliferation and all kinds of messages coming to them, use standard A or use standard B. And many of them, they have ended up using several standards in a single report. So Mervyn, what's your message to the practitioners of reporting? In your view, a corporation might take 18 months to 2 years time. What should they be doing in this time when they are being kind of pressed by different stakeholders and investors for using different standards and frameworks?
Well, I thought of this problem back in 2016, and I wrote my book, Chief Value Officer, with the subtitle, Accountants Can Save the Planet. What I said was that no accountant worth his or her salt sits in a corner office these days and merely drafts an AFS according to IFRS or US GAAP in America for consideration by audit committee. They deal with this whole value creation process from inputs to outcomes. And at my university, where I'm professor at the business school, but working with the School of Accountancy, in January, we're launching the first accreditation course for a chief value officer. And there's a university in France that is launching one. There's one in the UK, and one in Australia. And there are several companies. I'll just mention one. Major bank in South Africa, Standard Bank, has a chief value officer. And underneath him, he's got a financial director and he's got a sustainability director. And they feed information into him. He goes to a board meeting with this helicopter view and information about the whole value creation process from inputs to outcomes. So the sustainability practitioner certainly will not die. They will be absolutely necessary so that the board is informed about the critical sustainability issues through either the sustainability director or through the chief value officer. As I believe, and IFAC has agreed with me, that in future CFOs should be called chief value officers if they are really doing their job properly. And I think this is going to be critical to change that mindset of CFOs over the next 2 years, Elaine, to really get these changes going. So absolutely not. The practitioners, sustainability practitioners online, their jobs are absolutely critical, but of course they've got to keep up to date because things are moving with such speed. And that's why I said it's a story of 2 decades and 1 year of the last decade. because in the last year, I mean, dramatic things have happened. And I think it's been driven by the S sticking its head up over the E and the G, because we've seen from the pandemic the importance of health and safety suddenly, how important it is in a company. And we've seen the cooperation of countries in creating a vaccine. That's the kind of cooperation that was meant by the SDG. And that's the cooperation we now need to create this unified corporate reporting system, which I think is so urgent and critical.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. So, Elaine,
Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed.
Chief Sustainability Officer's jobs are safe, Elaine. That's the message. So let's thank Professor Mervyn King for his insightful keynote address. I think there's a lot to dwell on and think about what he had just said. And he referred to the gang of 5. We don't have 5, but we definitely have the gang of 4 here at this summit. And we are going to sit down with that gang very soon and continue this discussion. So thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. And we really have benefited, and we really appreciate your address and your wise words for us.